Welcome to a special edition of my live streams where we're going to be looking at the DxO Photolab, NIC collection, and also PureRaw. And I am familiar with all the products, but I don't really use them that much, like the Viewpoint and the Film Pack. So if you do have questions of those, I'll do my best to answer them. But uh, you know, I primarily use Photolab 8, which also includes the denoising capabilities of PureRaw 5. PureRaw 5, so let me start with Photolab 8, is a full-featured professional photo editing software. It's been my preferred editor of choice since way back, since Photolab 4 came out, when I initially purchased it. And since then, I've become a DxO affiliate. Meaning, if you use any of my affiliate links down below, I will earn a commission, which helps support the channel and is greatly appreciated. But Photolab 8 is a full professional photo editor. I think it gives the best results. Its signature uh, feature is really the DxO optics module and denoising. And what the DxO optics module does is it makes lens corrections, the most obvious one being, say, something like a fisheye lens. If it's in their database, they'll correct it and make it a rectilinear lens if you want to. If you don't want that, you can turn that off. Also, the denoising, I think, in my opinion, they're still the very best compared to anything else out there. The main one that I have to compare against is, say, Lightroom's own denoising program, which I never use. I always use DxO because in combination with the optics module is they have a database of cameras and lenses, thousands of them put together to dynamically sharpen and make corrections to the image. So it doesn't just globally sharpen an image, it actually knows where the lenses kind of get a little softer and are a little bit sharper, and it applies that sharpening and corrections based on what they have in their database from testing all these different combinations. And as I said, I think it gives the very best results when it comes to editing the images and processing those images, because there's other key things like there's a lot of things that we don't think about, like the DxO Wide Gamut, which is a really it's basically your color space that you're working in. So when you're working with colors in DxO Photolab, you get the very best colors without oversaturating them or getting color shifts. Uh, if if you're familiar with Lightroom, for example, the default color space is Pro Photo, which is technically a wider and more rich color space. But to achieve that, they actually have to map out imaginary colors that your camera's not capable of capturing, and that leads to slight differences in how DxO and Lightroom present the colors on your screen. And ultimately, the DxO Wide Gamut is going to give you a more accurate representation of the true colors in the scene versus some sort of imaginary calculated color that might come up when you're using Lightroom. It's very subtle. 99% of us are not going to notice the difference, but just know that the Wide Gamut will give you better colors, in my opinion. And then there's a demosaicing process. Photolab and PureRaw, for that matter, take the raw file and have their own way of what they call demosaicing the data from your camera, and so that you're able to edit it. Because the raw data in your camera are just a bunch of ones and zeros. It's a digital file, and it has to be converted through a demosaicing process for you to be able to edit them on your screen. And DxO, I also believe, has the very best demosaicing, which in the end results in you getting more detail out of your images, even when they're noisy, and ultimately a sharper image. So you're always getting the very best out of your camera when you use the DxO products. And a good example is early on, before I really got into DxO, I was using my Olympus camera with a 75 to 300 super telephoto lens, and I was never a fan of that lens. But after processing and getting good with DxO, Photolab in particular, you know, it really took that lens to another level. And I noticed that with a lot of lenses that are in their database, it really makes these lenses takes them to another level, in my opinion. So they're much the images you get out of what would otherwise be normally a soft image come out much sharper with much more detail. And that's one of the reasons I don't hesitate to use my kit lenses, so to speak, with the DxO Photolab products. So that and many, many other reasons, the workflow of editing the photos is very fast and efficient, and uh, like I said, and workflow is a whole different sort of conversation. I'll walk you through my workflow when I demonstrate the Photolab of how I edit the images, and it's a very generic workflow that you can probably use in any photo editing software, except say maybe Luminar. Luminar's got a whole different sort of workflow, but uh, Luminar I think is better at it has a different workflow. It'll work better for you if you use the workflow that it's intended to be used, that they intended you to use. Although you can use the workflow I'll be showing you today. So that said, let me see what else. You know me. I'm always unscripted and just kind of going off the top of my head. But I want to be here for you. If you do decide to purchase the Photolab 8, I do weekly live streams where I edit your photo. So you can submit them and I will edit them for you live. And we can talk about the edit and how I achieve certain things. And you can see the tools that I use and how I use them. So I encourage you to uh, submit your images and see me on Fridays when I do that. Because what better way to learn a product than to sort of watch over my shoulder and how I edit your photo and tools and the kind of results that I can get with DxO. And that's not to say that you're not going to do a better job. I'm always impressed with the editing that I see from a lot of the viewers. But for many of you, DxO is a new workflow and new tools, and it's a great way to learn how to use it. And like I said, I'm here every Friday to answer your questions on DxO Photolab 8. So you always have a point of contact, right, for tech support, kind of. And I always do the best I can. Obviously, I can't answer every question. I'm not technically, I'm not a tech support guy for DxO, but I'm here for you. So that's another reason for you to consider going into Photolab 8 is because you're not alone, right? You're not going to buy the software and then have to scour through hundreds of YouTube videos and watching tutorials. You can submit your image and say, I want to just see if I can get a little more finer detail out of the feathers, or I want to sort of, bring some color back into the sky and some details and texture back into the brickwork. And a lot of times, watching a tutorial online, they're cherry picking their images and they're not addressing the kind of thing that you want to do with your image. And so that's what I like to do. And as many of you know, I recognize a lot of names here that I do that just to help you and to be sort of your virtual tech support for the Photolab 8 and by uh, and by default, like PureRaw and Nick collection. So, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my workflow process, and I may pause after, I don't know, X amount of time and check the chat section if there's any questions uh, on anything that I'm doing, and then go back into the workflow, and then we'll go to the next product and the next, and uh, so keep the questions coming. I'll do my best to keep up with them and not miss any. If I do miss a question, don't hesitate to ask again. Okay, I will answer every single question that I can. All right, so and before we get started, actually, let me let me see. Roger says, Rob, when in Photolab 8, what level of D prime do you normally use? Okay, I normally use the XD2S. Okay, and I'll explain that when I'm doing that. So that's a good question because they have a lot of different options, and there's different reasons you may want to use different levels of noise reduction. The primary reason being uh, performance, right? And if the image doesn't have a lot of noise, it's just, just a sort of a normal image with a little bit of noise, you can use sort of the lower level noise reductions and the image will process much faster. For me, on my computer, I have a pretty much the fastest computer I could buy from 2 years ago, and it's holding up pretty well. It's Intel uh, 13900HX with a RTX 4080 dedicated graphics card. So, I've and 24 gig of RAM. I should get it to 32. I'm having a little trouble doing that for some reason, but uh, it's more. This is more than adequate to process most images in 10 or 15 seconds. I've seen computers. I have a 6-year-old computer. Processing the denoising process can take a minute to 2 minutes. And I had a friend that had a really very weak computer. Like it didn't have a dedicated graphics chip, like an NVIDIA graphics card, and it was taking her 15, 20 minutes to denoise an image using the highest level. So if that's a problem and you have an older computer, you may want to use one of the lower uh, level denoising, and you'll still get great results. The higher levels just take so much processing power. Okay, uh, let me see. I'm going to pull up Photolab 8, and I haven't even selected any images yet. Uh, I was just going through my folders before we started. So these are my images, right, that I took. And of course, on Fridays, you can submit your images. But I was just trying to go through and find an ideal candidate to demonstrate what I want to show in the workflow. Maybe something from Eisenhower. No. How about Glen Echo? Glen Echo's a nice park. Let me reset this. Okay, there's a decent image here I can work with. Maybe this one here. But anyhow, before we get too far or start editing, the first thing you need to do is to import your images. Now, DxO Photolab does not have a direct import feature. You have to use some other third-party software or just copy the files from your SD card in your camera to your computer. You can use your file manager. You can use Adobe Bridge. I think Adobe Bridge it's free and it's probably the best way to import your photos and videos onto your computer because it has a lot of different options. It's very similar to how Lightroom and other products import their images, but Adobe Bridge is a very clean way to import your images. And of course, there's others, but as you can see on the left side here, uh, these are my folders. Like this is my working folder, Drive D, and I broke it down to 2025, first quarter, second quarter. Then within 2025, I usually break it down chronologically by date. I need to enlarge the fonts here so you can see them. Give me 1 second. I'll do that. Because I don't have those fancy pants. There's some software that like kind of enlarges like wherever you hover your mouse. That would have been ideal for this, but okay. Hopefully that's a little better so you can kind of get an idea. And within the folder, if I have sometimes I have categories where I don't want to have like, there's some things that I do like almost every day. Like I like taking pictures of my dog. So I will make a folder within here that says 2025 first quarter Ellie, or 2025 first quarter backyard birds, or I go to Huntley Meadows quite often as well. So I wanted to just kind of group all of those instead of scrolling down and looking for it this way. But okay, so that's that. So you need to import your photos onto your computer. And then when you open up Lightroom, you navigate to the folder that you want to edit. And let me take my face off of here. And when you open up Photolab, you have two areas here, the photo library and customize. So photo library, again, is where you would navigate to the folder that has the images that you want to edit. So let's try, what was I? Glen Echo, right? So I'm going to navigate here, and I have the thumbnails here for the images, and then a preview up here. And I'm just using my mouse wheel to rolling the mouse wheel in and out, and it lets me zoom the image in and out. So I can kind of cherry pick or select the images that I want to edit. This is very useful for like when I have a sequence of images that are like a sequence of images of a bird in flight, and I can zoom in on each one and see which one has the best sharpness, right? Because sometimes they're out of focus, right? So I can go through each one and say, okay, this one's not bad, this one, okay. And then I may select it, but you start here in the photo library, you go navigate to the folder, and then you can either start pruning your images, like you want to delete images that you're not going to keep, or you want to highlight images that you want to start to edit. Uh, and that workflow is a whole different video altogether, but I'll tell you what I do is typically I will start with this image, and if I like this image, I'll give it 1 star. So I can either do that just by clicking it directly, or just doing Control-1 on my keyboard, and that will also add a star to that image. And I'll go through the images, like there's several images of this glass blower guy. I like this one, and I like this image, and this one, and this one. And then once I've gone through all the images that I like, I can filter just those images by clicking the filter icon here, and then selecting all the 1-star images. Or alternatively, once I'm done selecting the images, I can select the ones with no stars all at once, then select them all like this. Whoops. Just like you would in any file manager, and then hit the delete button or the trash icon here. And when I do that, it doesn't actually delete it from the computer. It goes into your trash bin on your desktop typically. And I'm using Windows, so I assume it's very similar on Mac. So you can recover these even after you delete them, unless you empty your recycle bin or your trash bin. But I'm not going to do that because I've already kind of pruned these images. Let's go back to the ones that I selected with a star. And there's several other filters here: picked images, raw, JPEG, bare raw images, which is slightly different than I can't think of a good example here, but this is for selecting images that use the bare processors, and which are different than, say, Fujifilm X images that use the X-Trans image sensor. But usually I just select raw like that. And I've also have selected 1-star. So now I'm looking at all the 1-star images. So that's generally always the first thing I do is I start pruning my images and select the ones that I want to edit. And then once I've decided on an image that I want to edit, I can double click it, or I can click on customize. So this is how you edit your images. So I can click customize, or I can just double click on it and it'll automatically go to the editing or customizing workflow. And along the top here, you have comparison tools, so you can compare before and after your edits in many different ways. There's split screens, sliders, things like that. These other tools up here are just shortcuts to helping you with things that you want to do first a lot of times. So I'll go through these. This is just putting the image to full screen, and I can just hit the escape key to go back. This just fills the screen edge to edge within the work editing panel here, or you can zoom in 1:1, or you can select a percentage here if you want to zoom in some other percentage. I rarely use these. I just use the wheel on the mouse to roll in and out like this. So that's the easiest way to do it. Okay. And then we have here a loop tool. This is for previewing, in particular for previewing what the denoise uh, processing does to the image. So right now I haven't applied any denoising, so we're not seeing any difference here between what's inside this loop and what the image is exactly. And you can change the zooming here from 100% up to 1600%, so I can see every single pixel when I do it this way. But typically I do 200% when I'm looking in, and your mileage will vary depending on the resolution of the image. And then here's a cropping tool, so you get quick access to cropping. And then the eyedropper tool, basically this is your white balance. Eyedropper. This is for leveling the horizon. And then this is for doing perspective corrections, in various different methods. This is a whole separate tutorial as well. I rarely use it up here. I usually do it using the side panel here of tools. And then here we have the healing brush tool, and there's two methods of healing brush. You can repair or you can clone. So what repair tries to do is tries to whatever area you want to repair. So let's say, for example, I want to get rid of this pole right here. Let me zoom in. Repair is probably the better way to do it. So I'll adjust my brush here, and the feathering and all of that is adjustable. And I'll just select that, and let's see what that does. And you can see that it does a pretty good job. I just need to adjust it sometimes because I grabbed a little bit of that tree and something like that. So now I've gotten rid of that hole. If I choose clone, what it's going to do is just copy wherever this is. So if I want to if I move it down here, you can see it's just copying the branches, versus if I click on repair, it's going to try and blend the area that you selected versus the area you're trying to delete. So after a while, you get a pretty good feel for how these tools work when you start using them. And there's also some additional controls here. If I want to add some additional repairs, I can do that. And I would just move this around like that. So, like I said, I'm just kind of doing a quick edit here just to give you a feel. But and then there's the eraser. Let's say I want to keep sort of this part here. Then for whatever reason, I just want to make the pole shorter. I can do that. And then one other interesting tool here is, let me reselect it, is I can actually change the shape of the area that I want to correct. this is very, very useful. I can rotate it. Now, on an image like this, it doesn't really make much difference, but on images that have, say, a lot of brickwork and windows, sometimes this is very, very useful where you can grab a part of a window from another part of the image and correct a window that may be in another part of an image, but the two windows are different sizes. So you can resize the window and the shape and bring it over. And if I run across an image that I can demonstrate that, I will. But this is very, very useful. So let's reset everything here because I don't really want to do any of those corrections. Actually, I can just reset everything I did very quickly right there. I've never used this tool, to be honest, the red eye tool. So I'm not going to talk about that. I don't do a lot of people pictures. Okay, so let me just take a quick stop here and ask if there's any questions about anything I've shown so far. Okay. So Roger says he uses OM Workspace. So OM Workspace is the free photo editing software that comes with Olympus and OM system cameras, and it does have an import feature, and that's a great way to import your images. And let's see. Henning says, I own Photolab 8 but rarely use it, mostly because I'm so used to Lightroom workflow. Man, I feel so old and I'm often missing some features. Does Photolab have a control to add or reduce haze? Yes. It's called it's in this panel here where the sun is. Oops, sorry. It's this panel here where we have the lighting panel, and it's called Clearview Plus. So you can see like these clouds are a little bit hazy, right? And if I click on this, I can adjust it so it's clear. And this effectively gets rid of haze and low contrast areas. And a lot of times I like to supplement that with a little bit of fine contrast like that. So, okay, very good. Let me go to the next panel here. And so that these are just quick access tools. I do use this crop a lot and occasionally the white balance and horizons, but mostly I do these things using this panel here, which is all of your tools. Just very quickly, there's a reset button here, which resets everything on the image back to its original form. And then here we can apply presets. So Photolab comes with a bunch of presets, and you can also create your own presets. So you can see I have two that I've created, my default preset, and also I have one I made specifically for high-res shot mode on OM system cameras because my default preset wasn't really optimized for high res. So I made another preset, and I'm still working on that. I'll share it with you once I got it kind of down. And then I also have a couple other presets here because I do have some full frame cameras where I can convert the full frame field of view to an APS-C crop or to a 4:3 crop. So here you can see, here's the original image. If I was shooting APS-C, it would be this size, and if I was shooting micro four thirds, it would be cropped down to this level. So it gives me an idea of because a lot of times you use different lenses, like adapted lenses on Sony cameras. You know, you might get like a TT Artisan, 35 millimeter manual focus lens that has no electrical contact. So this allows me to just crop the image very quickly to what I wanted. But a lot of times I like to shoot in full frame mode, even though I'm using APS-C lenses. But I you can create whatever preset you want, and I'll show you how that works a little bit later. I'll give you an example of another preset that I use. A lot of times I'll make a preset for a specific lens. Like this one here is for the Brighton Star 28 millimeter f5.6. That's their little pancake lens that they came out with. And I made a preset specifically for this to make some distortion corrections and apply just a little bit of sharpness and denoise. But the default presets here from DxO start here, DxO Style Natural. So if I click on this, what it's going to do, it's going to apply, presets that DxO decided on, right? That would look good. So, I'm looking at it. They pulled the highlights a little, pushed the midtones and shadows, added a little bit of like clear view, which is dehaze, and some contrast. They're also using the natural color profile, and they didn't apply very much denoising. They applied the lowest level, the standard. And then your basic optical corrections. Another preset, so I rarely use this preset. The preset I would recommend you use is the DxO standard right here. This will not really apply any exposure corrections other than a slight DxO smart lighting, which is sort of an intelligent way of analyzing the photo and looking for areas to brighten shadows and pull highlights. It also applies the camera profile if available. So in this case, it's applying automatically a PenF color profile. It's not applying any denoising, just very basic standard denoising. And then optical corrections, no special effects, and no local adjustments. So this is a good place to start with your editing. Now, what I normally do is I also apply D'XD2. So just to kind of get back to the other question, standard rendering is just going to primarily do minor luminance and chroma denoising. Just about every photo editing software has this kind of denoising. DxO's algorithm's a little different. I think it does a little better job, but for the most part, if you crank up your luminance too much, you're going to start to lose details, as you can see here. So if you click on auto here, it'll automatically analyze the photo and determine the best level for noise reduction. But a lot of times I end up adjusting this myself just to give it a little more kick. And then in the advanced settings, you can see that it got rid of all the chrominance. Luminance noise is sort of the grain that you see in the image. Chroma noise is the color noise. So if I turn off the color noise, it might be a little hard to tell. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the luminance and turn off the chrominance. If I increase the chrominance noise, it'll start to get rid of those like color speckles that you see, right? The little red, green, blue dots. It'll try and get rid of those first. And then luminance tries to get rid of that graininess like that. And that's what the standard does. Prime was their very first denoising algorithm. It's very fast and it does a good job. And it tries to do it without reducing detail. And this is ideal for much older computers where you don't need to denoise the image a whole lot. This one needs a lot of denoising, but this is better for images with little less noise in them. And you just need a quick output. And this does a very good job. D'Prime3 was introduced very recently. And this is essentially the same thing as D'XD, but without trying to extract too much detail. Because a lot of times these algorithms, what they do is they might see a noise pattern and mistake it for detail. So it'll start adding lines or detail that actually is not there. It's actually just a noise pattern, but it looks like something. D'Prime3 tries to avoid that. It tries to avoid pulling detail where there may not be detail. D'XD, on the other hand, with XD2S, this tries to actually pull as much detail as possible out of every image. You can adjust that slightly, but I generally use d'XD2S. This is great for doing birds, where you want to get the fine feather detail out. This will give you the very best results. So I always use this, but understand that d'Prime3 and d'XD2, you need sort of a modern computer or laptop that has a dedicated graphics card. And I think the Apple M chips, those are very good as well. That's when you can use these pretty readily and not have too much lag time between denoising and editing. Uh, what my friends do on their older computers is a lot of times they will just edit the entire image and then apply the denoising last, right, before they export. But I like to apply it straight up front. So I always just select d'XD2. Uh, and there's a quick question here from Shri. I think it doesn't really remove hot pixels. It may do it inadvertently, but it's not a hot pixels type tool. It's really looking for chroma, red, green, blue dots. You know, hot pixels, a lot of times they can be red. In those cases, it'll reduce it. But hot pixels tend to be, excuse me, a little smaller, like a single pixel. Sometimes they're larger than that, but this may pick up on some of those and it'll do a decent job, but ultimately I've noticed that I've had to go back and manually remove hot pixels sometimes in an image uh, using the healing brush. But for chroma noise, it does an excellent job because chroma noise is normally more tightly packed together, right? And across the entire image. And that's what the algorithm's looking for. It's not looking for like you have a black sky and an individual hot pixel there. It's not going to delete that because that could be a problem, especially in astrophotography images where you have a lot of stars in the sky and you might have some hot pixels. It's going to see the stars and the hot pixels almost the same and delete some of the stars inadvertently when it's trying to remove hot pixels. So the chroma reduction that's why a chroma reduction or noise reduction doesn't really work on hot pixels too well because it would inadvertently also delete stars if you're doing like astrophotography. So that's a very good question. Okay, so that's the presets. And I've created a preset myself. Basically, it's almost the same as the DxO standard, but instead of standard noise reduction, which they selected here, I applied d'XD right up front. And then I do a couple other things like chromatic aberrations down here. I click on this and I click on this. And I go back here and I deactivate smart lighting. And that's my preset because I don't want it to do any changes to the exposure before I start editing the image myself. I want to do it myself. I changed this to natural. I like the natural color profile that DxO has instead of, say, the camera profile that tries to reproduce the original colors that the camera created. I like the natural myself, but it's all subjective. You know, you pick whatever you want. I also select the auto here, and I like to back off the lens sharp. I'm just giving you a quick preview at my preset. And that's all I do. And then what I can do is, if I want to save this preset, I can go to Image, New Preset from Image Settings, and then I'm just going to save it over the top of I can name it here to something else if I want, but I'm just going to save it to the same one that I created, Rob's default, because that's all I do. So if, for those of you that watch my weekly editing streams, this is what my default preset is for my images. And it's essentially just checking a couple more boxes and going right into D prime XD rather than standard. All right, so let's go over to this panel here underneath. So we've done all of this. Lightroom categorizes the tools into these different icons, right? So the first one is lighting or exposure of the image. The next one are the various colors, and we have a lot of tools here, which I'll go over. And then here we have the denoising and sharpening. What do they call this? Detail. So this is the detail category. This is the geometry category for correcting, for doing cropping primarily, straightening horizons, and any perspective distortions that you might want to fix. This is our special effects panel, like adding watermarks. And if you have, say, if you have DxO Film Pack, it'll also add some additional things in here for you if you want, filters and grain. I don't know exactly if Photolab includes all of these. Like, I'm pretty sure it doesn't include vignetting in the default Photolab 8. This is a film pack add-on. So this panel here, primarily you're going to use if you want to add a watermark to your images. So I usually have one for a client. I don't know where I put it, but did I save it? No, I didn't save it. But one of my clients like a watermark on all their images, so I have a watermark that I make for them. And then finally, we have local adjustments. This is where you have like your radio, like if you use Lightroom, this would be similar to the radio filters, linear filters, brushes, things like that. And I'll demonstrate this very quickly as well using this image. So these are different categories, and you can kind of work on these. Now, right here, you have some options to select your favorite kinds of correction tools that you like to use. I don't have any selected right now because I use them all. And then over here, you have active corrections, which tells you which corrections are currently being used on this image. So right now I have the DxO Optics module being used on this image. And if I turn this off, it goes away. So for example, let me unselect that. If I want to make a change to the exposure, like I think it's too dark, and then I'm going to push the shadows a little bit more even, and maybe a slight pull on the highlights, add the clear view to it, and let's select the white balance. This door right here is roughly white, and I'll just pull the highlights in a bit more. So now if I select this active corrections button, it's going to show me only the edits that I made to the image, or only the tools that I use to edit this image and nothing else. So I can see this for a very simple edit. I just needed to use a few tools to get to, I think, a pretty dramatic difference very quickly. So that said, how different is this image from the original? Well, let's go back up here to the top of the compare tool, and there's a little drop-down box. And I can compare the original image without geometric corrections, with no corrections, but with geometry, and I'll explain the difference, or all corrections except white balance. So what I'm going to do is, or I can use the current image as a reference, etc. We'll come back to these, but let's do no corrections without geometry. Now, all I have to do is click on this before and after like this. I can see it this way. So right now I'm just using the full editing window, but I can do a side by side as well. And I can zoom in and out on each side individually. And now I can compare them just side by side. And you can see with just these very basic edits, I made a pretty dramatic difference. And then there's some other tools here. for landscape shots, maybe you want to have, you have two very wide images. You might want to put them on top of each other, or you can do a split view. And again, zooming in and out, I'm just using the wheel on my mouse to go back and forth. I can do it this way. I like to do this sometimes. And then there's also a vertical split top-down view. So this is better for wider images. But you have options here to compare the image a lot of different ways. All right, so let me tell you what this compare with geometry. Now, when I do this, you may notice that there's no difference between comparing with and without geometry. Well, if I had made any kind of cropping, or I was using a fisheye lens where it did some heavy optical corrections, you would see a difference. So let me go back to the editing panel, and I'll just crop this image to say on the left side, because that pole is a little bit too close to the edge of the image. So I'm going to crop in right here. Now, when I do this comparison side by side, and I say corrections without geometry, you can see that I'm seeing the fully uncropped image here on the left versus the cropped image or edited images over here. And a lot of times you don't need to do that. A lot of times you can just do this. You want to see the cropped, unedited image with the cropped image that you edit. All right. So that's that. Okay. Where do I want to go next here? So let's go back to full image. Now, what we're seeing here is just sort of a preview of the edit. This is not the final edit. Okay. And the most obvious example of that is you can still see a lot of noise in here. So DxO has included a little loop tool here so that you can preview what the exported image will look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the image. And I have a navigation thing over here on the left side, just right here. So as I'm zooming in, I'm going to zoom in on the sign here. And then I'm going to move the loop tool around above and below that sign. Let me change this. Let me zoom in a bit more. I'm going to zoom in. Let's go to 300%, 200%. So you can see here how all of the noise has been removed from the image. And I still got very, very good detail here. So this gives me an idea. This is very useful for when I want to fine tune the denoising algorithm. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to the denoising panel or detail panel. And oh, there is a dead pixels thing right here. It is separate from Luminance. My bad. I rarely have dead pixels in my image, so yeah, anyway, my mistake there. Okay, so here I can say I want to force details more, where it's going to try to find in the noise detail. It's going to be more aggressive. And sometimes, like I said, it may pull in detail from noise that's actually just noise. And this also can bring out detail that it wouldn't normally be able to bring out under, say, the default settings. Or you can just back this off. And now the image looks very, very soft. So the default setting, I almost 99% of the time I leave it on a default setting. If I'm really trying, like very fine details and feathers and things, I may crank this up a little bit, but almost never, the default setting. The other thing here underneath here is, and these are global changes to the entire image. The lens sharpening optimization is intelligent in that it's only going to sharpen areas based on the optics module. And sometimes I try this, but a lot of times the default here, if I double click on it, it'll snap back to the default setting, is +1. Personally, I have found this to be a little bit too aggressive and the images look a little bit over sharpened. So my default setting, I like to start at 0. But when I'm using this loop tool, I can zoom, being zoomed in like this, I can actually see how much difference is making. So if I find a bird photo, we'll do a bird photo where this will be a little bit more obvious. And then I can crank up the details here even more. And again, this adjusts for the bokeh in the background. I never adjust that. I leave that at 50%. But as you can see, it's not doing it just in a dumb way. It's doing it in an intelligent way. Even though I have these cranked all the way up, it's not making a huge difference to the image because it's the DxO knows that there's no detail there. Slide this all you want. I'm not going to over sharpen the image if I don't have to, right? So it's intelligent in that sense. It's making a very tiny difference in this part of the image, but a lot of times, in this case, I'm pretty content with just the default settings or even backing it off a little bit is what I normally do. On my lower ISO images, I back this off. If I'm at base ISO, I definitely black this down to 0. Sometimes I even do -1. But that's what that's for. This is a relatively high ISO image, so +1 is good. And then, of course, we have chromatic aberrations. These are like purple lines. You get like these purple lines along bright, high contrast images that does a good job at reducing that. All right, so let's turn off the loop. Okay. So this image looks pretty good already. What I might do is just back this off a little bit. But this is the core of the editing, right? And I have an outline below in the description of this video of my workflow for editing images that really you can use in any photo editing software. From this point, I go right to local adjustments. But let me explain something. This image was way underexposed. Like if I show the before and after, and that's why I went to the exposure tools first to make these adjustments. And this is the very easiest way to make adjustments to your photos, especially if you're just getting started in DxO or if you're just getting started with editing your raw images. Using these tools here are the easiest way to make improvements to your image. As you get more advanced, you're going to start to use local adjustments where you want to make changes to just individual parts of the image, but in a very natural way. And that's where these local adjustment tools come in. So let me turn off the active correction so we can see them all. And I'm going to go back to a full screen. So when I'm looking at this image, what I would like to do actually is I'm going to go back. I'm going to lower the exposure a bit, make it a little darker. Yeah, I'll just go back to 0 because I have adjustments down here in selective tones. And I want to make this a little brighter here and a little bit cooler because the sign is blue. And I want that blue to kind of spread down here. And whenever I do architecture, I like to focus on the front doors of any kind of architecture. So I'm going to select what they call a control point here, and just pick a point right here in the middle, right near the door, and spread this out a little bit. Now this has masking tools. So this red area right now is currently what is being affected in the scene. And from here, I scroll down, and this is where I make adjustments that apply only to this masked out area in the control point. Now, the control point, I put this roughly, if I zoom in, I'm putting this roughly on the red part. So let me disable this. Hold on. I'm putting the control point right on this red. So that's sort of the starting point for the control point to look at. So it's going to look at the solid red color that I've selected here, and then it's going to mask the rest of the control point area here relative to the red. And that's controlled here with the mask selectivity. So let me turn this back on. So right now I'm affecting all of this area plus or minus 50% on the rest on chroma and luminance, which is color and brightness. If I want to brighten everything, I can turn the selectivity to 0. And now this is a standard radial gradient. It's going to just brighten everything gradually so I can push the exposure. And it's going to brighten everything regardless of color and brightness. It's going to brighten everything. However, if I only want to brighten up the red in this area, I can crank up the chroma. Remember, the default setting was 50, so it's getting the red plus 50% into everything else, and then feathering out. But I can tell it, only select the red. And now you can see it's not selecting any of the whites, and it's only selecting the red areas. And here I can just brighten the red, and it's not affecting anywhere else. Versus if I turn this back down, you can see it's brightening everything. And and I just double click on these to reset them. But this is where I like to, I normally leave these at 50%, and I only adjust these plus or minus 5 or 10. Because if I do too much, it can look a little unnatural. And if I do too little, it's going to spread more than I want it to. So I found the 50% setting is about right, then plus or minus 5 or 10. So I'm just going to do a little more selectivity here at plus 5. And then luminance is based on the brightness. So the brightness of this red is dark, this red is darker than the white areas and the yellows. So if I select the selectivity here, it's only going to select the darker areas of the scene here. It's not a great image to illustrate that particular selectivity. But I'm just going to crank it up just a little bit, just to 5, like that. I just want this door to be a little brighter. And I can move the control point around. And then I'm going to cool it off in terms of white balance. So I can do that here. That way, the blue from the crystal pull sign here, you get the feeling that it is illuminating the front of the door a little bit more, right? And I can do that with just the control point. So I'm just going to exaggerate it a little bit. And then maybe push the highlights a bit in the midtones. I can do selective tone adjustments here as well. Okay, and then now the front door is illuminated more for this particular architectural type photo. I can maybe try to bring in the highlights on this lamp. So I can just pull the highlights down a bit like that. And I can add another control point using the plus sign. And let's just bring the shadows up around this lamp like this. I'm just going to add a little brightness here. And this lamp has sort of got a little bit of a yellow glow. So I'm going to increase the white balance and make it a little bit warmer. like that. Spread this out. You can bring it down a bit, right there. And then the last thing I'll do is maybe the sky. I can use what's a control line. The control line has the same, and I'm going to click on plus. The control line has the same masking selectivity tools as the control point. So right now I can move this to different areas of the sky, and it's going to mask based on luminance and color. So if I bring this all the way down to the brightest part, you can see it's not affecting up here as much. If I bring it up here, it's going to affect here, but less so down here. So again, this is a way to sort of be more selective in how you mask a certain area. If I select, say, a very dark area, you can see it barely doing anything to the sky, and it's affecting the trees more over here. But I'm going to select here towards the brighter part, and then what I want to do is maybe brighten that up a little bit more, like that. And then I will just give it a little more warmth. So it looks a little less like twilight and looks a little bit more like sunset, right? Okay, and let's say I'm all done with that. I can click on my active corrections tools here. Let's go back to the normal panel. I can double check these. I can double check the local tools that I'm using. And I don't think I want to do anything else. So all I have to do now is export this. So I'll just right click on it and say export to disk. I'm going to export it to the same folder. And I have different options here: JPEG, TIFF, DNG. I always do at JPEG. I can add a suffix to the file so that I know it was processed with DxO. And I'm going to disable resizing. You want to select sRGB as your output because when you're editing the photo, you're actually working in the DxO Wide Gamut color profile, so you get the maximum flexibility, or maximum, you can see the maximum number of colors on your display and edit. But when you export, you always want to export sRGB so it looks correct and accurate on other people's phones and TVs and computer screens and things like that. If you're exporting to very specific spaces, you can select them here as well. This is useful more for like, if you're going to be exporting to, to a high-res TV or HDR TV, or exporting for editing in another type of software. But for 99% of us, we're going to just export sRGB. So no watermark, all the exit data, and I'm just going to export. All right, and that should show up in here. I have to uncheck the raw. And there's a little icon right here showing you that it's being exported. Sometimes the first image takes a little longer, but normally it's 10 or 15 seconds for me to export this with all of the denoising and optical corrections and other edits that I made. Okay, it's done. So here's the final outputted image, and it looks really good. So let's compare that to the original. So let me go back to the library. Here's the original image. I'm going to reset this. And now what I can do is I can compare this to the output. I output this as PenF 1370-DxO. And I can click compare before and after. Or I can do the side by side. And I'm going to move the panels out of the way. I just hit the F9 key to move the panels out, and I can move them back in by hitting the F9 key again. But you can see Sorry for that. You can see I made a pretty dramatic difference very quickly. And that's what I mean about the overall workflow for DxO is very, very smooth and very natural in my opinion. And that's why I really like this just for even editing my photos, even if it didn't have a denoising feature. Simply editing the photos alone, I think the workflow is very smooth and very quick. But if we want to compare, let's do a slider. Let's compare the noise before and after. You can see what a huge difference this made with the noise. And if I zoom out, you can also see how much I cropped in. Okay, I'm going to stop here and check the chat section, see if there's any questions. And Jan says, I use noise reduction when I save photos. Now I have to do it the other way around. But at what ISO is noise reduction in DxO effective? I use it on every image, regardless of ISO, whether it's base ISO at 100 or 200, or even if it's ISO 12,000 or 25,000. I use it on everything. And then I fine tune it to based on the image. Like this image here that I was showing, this is only 3200 ISO, but it's super noisy because it's very low light, and I had to push the shadows up quite a bit because noise hides in the shadows, and when you try to pull the shadows up and brighten them, that's when you see a lot of noise, and that's why this image is very noisy because, as you can see, the original image was very, very dark, and I had to brighten it quite a bit. So ISO is relative to the overall exposure of the image. If the image is very dark, even a low base ISO image of 200 or 100, when you try to brighten that image, it's going to be noisy, even if you shot it at base ISO. So really, you know, the DxO D Prime is going to work on all of the images and do a great job, or as good a job as it can, given whatever the input is. In this case, an ISO 3200 image is terrible. It has terrible noise because it's a little bit underexposed. In other images, I've taken at ISO 12,800. The the noise is pretty minimal, and it does a great job on those images as well. So DxO noise reduction is effective on all ISOs. I would use it on everything. And thanks, Rob, for the demo on Photolab 8. As for removal of dead and hot pixels, the standard noise reduction does it under advanced settings. Perhaps this is, yeah, yeah, I saw that in the thing. My bad. Thanks for bringing that up, though, Raveen. And Roger says, how good is Photolab 8 help section? Do they also have help videos? I know other bloggers have podcasts on just Photolab. Yeah, the help section is actually pretty robust. The user manual has a lot of screenshots and very good descriptions, and they go a lot of detail. But that's kind of the help section read manual. As far as videos go, Photo Joseph did a lot of, not a lot. He did it like 6 or 9 videos for Photolab, and they're coming out with videos for the other products. So it's pretty minimal at this point. I think the little bit I just showed you here gave you more, was more useful than any videos that they have on the DxO site. But maybe you don't like the way I do things, and you can watch their videos, and maybe it's more clear when you watch their videos. But I've watched their videos, and they're very rudimentary. Uh, they don't really go into the fine print. They just kind of give you a quick overview, and it's great for getting started. But I can't help myself. I get into the fine print a little bit too quickly sometimes. uh, but it's important because these little things can make all the difference, right? And I see Intrigue is here and Jan is here. Okay, very good. All right, so let's go back to Photolab, and I'm going to hit the F9 key, and that'll bring the panels back up. And that's the image we just got done working on, and I showed the comparison. But there's so many tools here. There's of course also a tone curve here. You can make adjustments this way if you want. You can do it to individual color channels. So if I want to make the reds a little bit darker, I'm sorry, greener, this makes it greener, this makes it redder. But it applies to the whole image, it's global. I like using curves when I'm in Olympus workspace or OM workspace. I like using the curves because the selective tone controls in Olympus workspace are a little bit too coarse, and the tone curve gives me much more uh, precision in the tones that I want to work with. They also have a luminance button here, the L. So you have red, green, and blue channels, and then luminance. So this affects only the brightness of the image without affecting the colors. So I can bring up the midtones, maybe push the shadows a bit more, and pull the highlights. This takes a little getting used to. You have to get good at it because you can very quickly make an image look kind of weird, right? If you try to do too much here. So uh, my only advice here is always try to keep a nice curve whenever you work with things. Try to keep the curve straight but curvy. So if I want to, in this case, let me reset. So let's say I want to push the shadows a bit. I'm going to go down here and just push the shadows a bit. And then I'm going to bring in the highlights a little bit. And then maybe adjust the midtones down just a tiny bit, or I can bring them up. But you don't want to do too much here. You just want to stay with very, very small curves. Otherwise, like I said, you can get some kind of weird results like that if you get carried away. I don't recommend using this unless you're really good at it. And you got to practice, right? But once you practice and start using it, you get a good feel for it. I might have a tutorial on this somewhere, but it's easier just to use this. These sliders maintain very smooth, natural curves when you make the adjustments this way. So you don't have to worry about getting weird results. I might be able to force it. Yeah, I can kind of force it. So that looks weird, right? But for the most part, using the selective tone will give you better results than trying to work with the tone curve directly, unless you need some really very high precision on the exact tones and colors that you want to work with. Okay, I'm just going to double click on these to reset them. I see a comment here from Ravine about the tone picker in the luminance bar. So that's something they added, I think, with Photolab 8. So I haven't been using this feature because it wasn't in the previous version, so I never got around to it. So what Ravine is referring to is this tone picker tool down here, just underneath uh, the tone curve panel here. And I can select this tone picker like this, and then wherever I drop my mouse, it's going to select that particular tone and brighten it. Now this is affecting the colors and the luminance all at the same time. I selected red. Let me select RGB. So if I select RGB, it's affecting everything here. It's a very subtle difference, but if I select luminance only, let me reset that. I can just brighten sort of these parts of it here. And then let's say I want to brighten up the shadow areas, I can select down here. And you can see the tone curve being moved over in here, like this. Just clicking and holding the left button on the mouse, I can make adjustments here, maybe a little bit in the midtones, like that. So that does make using the tone curve a lot easier. And then let's go back to the red channel, and I want to just add a little bit of warmth to the sky to give it more of a twilight feeling. Maybe come down here a bit, give it more of a red glow. And that's just another way. And then I can go back to clear view, add the clear view back in, things like that. So thanks for bringing that up, Raveen. I do overlook this particular tool a lot because uh, it's sort of a new thing they added in Photolab 8, and it's never been part of my workflows. And like I said, I found just using these selective tone bars work just as well, because I can just push the shadows, push the highlights a bit in the midtones like that. I kind of like working that way, and also I get hard numbers here because I'm a detailed person. But let me look at one other thing here. This image had plenty of color already, but if I wanted to enhance the oranges like down in here, I can use my dropper and select an area down here. Let me do this. It's not seeing any color. Hold on. There, I gotta select, there we go. So this is kind of an orange. See, it selected the color when I dropped it. If I drop it over here on the blue areas, it's gonna select the blues, and I can increase the saturation of the blues if I want. But I wanted to saturate the oranges down here. So I can do that like that. Maybe give it a little brightness as well. And let's see the grass down here. Let me move this over into the greens. Yep, that looks good. But you get the idea. This is the hue, saturation, and luminance. You can select individual colors. You can pick your colors. You can adjust it. So you can adjust sort of the hard areas, the hard stops in color, or you can feather the color into other colors like this. So that, whenever you make adjustments to the color, just like all the other tools, it's very gradual and very natural looking. You're not going to get sort of this overcooked image unless you want to, right? Okay. Let's reset everything there. And the local adjustment. Okay, so let me show you the brush real quick. We'll go back here to the local adjustments. I have a couple of brushes here. I have an auto select brush, which will automatically try to mask. So I can kind of select just this building and go around it. This tool is okay. I don't use it very often. But let's say I just wanted to brighten that area. It should selectively select it. Well, I did a good job that time. It's just brightening the building and not the sky, right? Because it auto masks the building. And then I can expand on that like this, get it to come and just overlap a little bit onto the areas you don't want masked. And you can do that. Or you can just use a standard brush. Let me reset that. And you can just brush it yourself. This is also a useful tool. And then up here you have adjustments for feathering, flow, and opacity. Flow is just, how strong is the brush stroke, and opacity is how 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 much effect that brush is going to have. So I'll demonstrate that difference. So let's say I want to brighten this part right here for whatever reason. It's kind of bleeding over into the sky a little bit. But if I want to reduce that effect, I can just reduce the opacity. Could I select this? Yeah. Yeah, the opacity of this brush here. So I can gradually bring in what I did this way with opacity. flow is a little bit different. Let's start a new brush. Let's put the flow down to 10%. And I'm going to make the brush a little bigger. If I brush here, and let's increase the brightness, say, it's not making that much difference, right? It's making a 20%. It's only being brushed 20% in. Then I can brush again. Should be a little brighter. That should be 60%, then 80%. And if I do it one more time, that should be 100%. And if I keep doing this, it's not going to make any difference because we've already kind of hit 100%. But I can still reduce the effect of this by opacity. So brushing allows you to sort of kind of just gradually add things in. Let's say I want the left side of this building to be brighter. I can just keep brushing it over here, but then just add a little bit of brightness here and here. Because I'm only doing it at 20%. But if I go over it twice, it's now 40%, now 60%, now 80%, now 100%. And now no matter how many times I go over this, it's not going to change because I'm already at 100%. So I'd have to either increase this. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. Let me trash that one. And then we have an eraser tool. So if I, this is all pretty straightforward. So if I brush this in, let's say I increase the brightness. Let me do it over here a little bit. Oh, let me increase the flow. So as you can see, I kind of bled into the sky a little bit. I can select the eraser tool and just erase that part out. Let me increase the flow to 100%. And the eraser tool has the same flow and opacities and feathering. So I can go around the building this way and get rid of it. So this is really good for when you have a little bit of spill and you want to feather it back in a little bit. That's when I like to use the eraser tool. Okay, and then Eric says off topic, but I love watching LUTs. 8 hours of this brutal heat. By the time I get home in AC, I'm ready to sleep. Yeah. I'm not sure what you mean watching LUTs. If you mean live streams, that's I guess. But and Hank says, even after using DxO for 2 months, I'm still learning tons from this video. Much thanks. I love DxO. Okay, great, Hank. I'm happy to help. Super. So I'll leave it there. I have my affiliate links down below. I'll earn a commission if you buy that. It's greatly appreciated. You can always just donate directly if you want, but today I'm focused mostly on doing this in the workflow. I may make some videos where I compress everything I did today into 10 minutes or something. I don't know if I can. That might be a little bit more useful so you can kind of watch it over and over again instead of trying to go through a 2-hour live stream, right? I'll be back tomorrow for a shopping live stream. I'll mention DxO tomorrow, but I'm not going to dwell into it like I did today. But tomorrow we're going to talk about some deals. Prime Day is coming up next week, I think. So we'll look forward to that. And I think that's it. So you guys have a great rest of your week. I hope to see you again tomorrow. And I might do another one of these tonight because I messed this one up so bad. But I will, I'll think about that. But you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you again soon.